I've always been a pretty practical guy, logical, grounded, not the type to overthink things. But when your wife of nearly 2 decades starts acting weird, even the most trusting man starts connecting the dots. Jessica and I had been married for 19 years, long enough to see each other through everything. Career changes, 2 kids, and more late-night arguments than I care to count. But lately something felt off. She worked in a male-dominated field, which I never really cared about, but she'd recently started spending more time hanging out with her coworkers after her day shifts. A couple of late nights turned into her rolling in at 7 or 8 p.m., and then came the occasional text like, "I crashed at Amanda's. Too drunk to drive." Amanda, huh? Funny, Amanda's name never came up before these last few months. The real kicker? That one rainy morning. It was around 3 a.m., and I was half asleep when her phone lit up the room. She wasn't being sneaky about it, Jessica never was, but it caught my attention because, well, who the hell has a vibrant text life at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday? A coworker emergency? Sure. But the sudden flurry of notifications didn't scream, "Susan needs help finishing the spreadsheet." Jessica got out of bed and started getting dressed. It wasn't the slow, bleary-eyed, "I'm still half asleep" dressing either. It was the quick, focused kind, like she was prepping for something that mattered. "What are you doing?" I mumbled. She glanced over her shoulder with her "don't ask questions" smile. "Oh, just meeting some coworkers for an early morning walk before my shift." At 4 a.m. In the rain. Right. I didn't argue though. Not yet. I'd learned over the years to let Jessica's ridiculous stories ride until I had something more concrete to go on. But this particular tale felt like it came out of the Bad Liar's handbook. She grabbed her jacket, kissed me on the cheek, and was out the door. I laid there for a while, staring at the ceiling. "A morning walk," I muttered. In weather, with a light drizzle to make it all extra scenic. For a woman who hated the gym and could barely commit to a yoga class, Jessica suddenly had the athletic discipline of a marathon runner. At around 5 a.m., I needed the truck for a dump run, so I texted her. No reply. 15 minutes later, I called. She picked up after a couple of rings, her tone chipper, too chipper for someone allegedly taking a damp jog through town. "Still walking," she said casually. "You can grab the truck from the parking lot at work." Her work was 10 minutes away. If they'd started walking at 4, they should have been back by now, sipping lukewarm coffee at their desks. But no, still walking. Right. I hung up and sat there, my gut twisting in a way I couldn't ignore. Something wasn't adding up. I thought about checking the seat of her car for signs of anything, wet footprints, maybe, but it was too much effort for a rainy morning. Instead, I settled on something simpler. Later that day when she got home, I asked the one question that has a funny way of cutting through BS. "Can I see your phone?" Her reaction? Gold. She blinked, tilted her head, and with a smirk said, "Sure. As long as I can see yours." The old switcheroo. A classic. But I handed her mine without hesitation. I had nothing to hide. Meanwhile, she handed me her phone, and the moment I opened her messages, I knew. There was nothing there. Not the normal nothing of a woman who prefers phone calls, but the suspicious kind of nothing. The thread I'd seen light up her screen hours ago? Deleted. "Where's the conversation you were having at 3 a.m.? I asked, my tone as flat as hers was defensive. "What conversation?" she asked, feigning innocence like she was auditioning for a crime drama. The missing messages bugged me, so I did a little digging. Typed in the number I'd glimpsed earlier and pulled up a name. Chris. Not Amanda. Not even close. I glanced at her, holding her phone up like it was Exhibit A in court. "So, who's Chris?" Her jaw tightened, but she still tried to play dumb. "Oh, just a coworker." "A coworker you text over 900 times in 1 month?" Her face flushed, and for the first time, she looked genuinely uncomfortable. "We were just talking," she stammered. "About work. And divorce." That last word hit me like a gut punch, but I didn't flinch. I wasn't giving her the satisfaction. "Divorce, huh?" I said calmly. "Planning yours, or helping him with his?" Jessica froze. It was the kind of pause that confirms more than words ever could. I didn't say another word. Just went upstairs, grabbed a bag, and packed like I'd been planning this for months. By the time I walked out the door, her eyes were wide with panic, but she didn't say a thing. Maybe she was too stunned to stop me. Or maybe she knew there was nothing she could say to fix it. I wasn't entirely sure where I was going yet. But one thing was clear, this wasn't going to end the way Jessica thought it would. I moved into a motel that night. Nothing fancy, just a place to crash while I figured out my next move. You'd think after discovering your wife's planning an exit strategy, you'd be losing sleep, spiraling into some melodramatic breakdown. But surprisingly, I slept like a baby that first night. Maybe it was because, deep down, I'd known this was coming for years. Jessica and I hadn't been happy for a long time. Her affair was just the last nail in a coffin that had been sealed shut long before Chris entered the picture. The next morning, I called a lawyer I knew, a guy named Dave who specialized in divorce cases for men who got blindsided. Dave's advice? Don't make any emotional decisions. Keep your head down, gather your evidence, and play the long game. He also told me something I hadn't even considered, the house. Turns out Jessica couldn't afford to buy me out, and selling it wasn't going to be her choice, it'd be a legal necessity. That little nugget of information gave me the clarity I needed. For now though, I had to go back. Not because I wanted to, but for the kids. We had 2 boys, Nathan 15 and Tyler 10. Good kids, though Nathan was already going through that sarcastic teenage phase where he thought he was smarter than everyone else. Tyler, on the other hand, had a gift for calling out BS. He didn't say much, but when he did, it was like a verbal sniper shot. When I walked back into the house, Jessica was in full damage control mode. She greeted me with a forced smile, like nothing had happened. "Morning," she chirped, trying to sound casual. "Morning," I replied, matching her tone with just enough edge to let her know I wasn't buying it. The boys were at the kitchen table, eating cereal. Nathan glanced at me, then at Jessica. "You guys have a fight or something?" he asked, his mouth half full of Lucky Charms. Jessica laughed nervously. "Of course not. Dad just had work stuff to handle last night." Tyler squinted at her, his spoon hovering in the air. "Then why were you crying this morning?" Bullseye. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. Jessica shot him a glare that could have melted steel, but Tyler just shrugged and went back to his cereal like he didn't give a damn. I grabbed a cup of coffee and sat down across from them. Jessica was practically vibrating with discomfort, so I decided to make it worse. "You know, Jess," I said, stirring my coffee lazily, "I was thinking we should probably sit the boys down later and have a family chat. Maybe talk about honesty, trust, stuff like that." Her eyes darted toward me, then the boys, then back to me. "Sure," she said, her voice tight. "We'll, figure out a good time." I sipped my coffee, savoring her unease like a fine wine. After breakfast, I went into recon mode. While Jessica was out, probably walking with Chris again, I started gathering anything I could use in court. Bank statements, credit card bills, phone records. The phone records were especially enlightening. Over 900 texts between Jessica and Chris last month alone, not to mention dozens of calls during times when she'd claimed to be working late or out with friends. But the real jackpot? Her laptop. Jessica wasn't exactly tech-savvy, so she hadn't bothered to clear her browsing history or log out of her email. I found everything: hotel reservations, late-night Uber receipts, even an Amazon order for a set of men's cologne that definitely wasn't mine. It was almost too easy. But in fact, you could say that it was just ordinary things, but then I came across a folder labeled personal. If you're ever trying to hide something incriminating, here's a pro tip: don't label it personal. It's like putting a neon sign on your secrets. Inside, I found emails and messages saved as drafts. One of them caught my attention immediately. It was an email she'd written to her best friend, Amber, but never sent. The subject line: "What's next?" Curiosity got the better of me, so I clicked it. In the email, Jessica had laid out her exit strategy in painstaking detail. She talked about how she'd been feeling unfulfilled in our marriage for years, how she was tired of being stuck with someone who wasn't ambitious enough for her tastes. The kicker? She admitted she'd started seeing Chris because she believed he was her upgrade. She wrote that he had more money, more drive, and that she thought he could offer her a better life. She even said she was strategically planning her exit to ensure she'd come out ahead financially and emotionally. My hands clenched as I read those words. It wasn't just an affair. It was a goddamn business plan. But the worst part? She didn't even seem conflicted. There was no hesitation, no guilt. Just a cold, calculated plan to replace me like I was a used car she'd outgrown. I sat there for a moment, staring at the screen, letting the reality of it all sink in. This wasn't just about infidelity anymore. This was betrayal on every possible level. I kept reading, my blood boiling as she described her timeline. She wanted to secure her footing with Chris before officially leaving me, and she was counting on me being too passive to do anything about it. That's when it hit me. She thought she was smarter than me. She thought I'd just roll over and let her walk away with everything. Big mistake. I copied all to a flash drive. I didn't know exactly how I'd use them yet, but I knew they'd come in handy when the time came. By the time she got home, I had a folder full of evidence that could sink her like the Titanic. And when Jessica got home later that day, I was already back to playing the role of oblivious husband. She greeted me with her usual fake smile, completely unaware that I now knew everything. I smiled back, thinking about the email. What's next? Oh, Jessica, you have no idea. Hey, she said, setting her purse down. How was your day? Productive, I replied, standing up. You. Her smile faltered for a split second, but she recovered quickly. Good. Just busy with work stuff. I nodded. Busy, huh? Yeah, I bet you were. Her eyes narrowed slightly, and for a moment, I thought she might ask what I was holding. But she didn't. Maybe she knew. Maybe she didn't want to know. Either way, it didn't matter. Over the next couple of weeks, I played the long game. I acted like everything was fine, even laughing at her stupid jokes and pretending not to notice when she came home late. Meanwhile, I was working with Dave to put together the ultimate my own divorce strategy. Jessica had no idea what was coming. She thought she was in control, that she could keep stringing me along until she was ready to leave for good. But what she didn't realize was that I wasn't playing her game anymore. The final straw came on a Thursday night. I was sitting in the living room, pretending to watch TV, when Jessica came downstairs dressed to the nines. Going out? I asked casually. Yeah, just meeting the girls, she said, grabbing her purse. I nodded, barely looking at her. Have fun. She hesitated for a moment, probably expecting me to ask more questions. When I didn't, she smiled and walked out the door. As soon as she was gone, I grabbed my keys and followed her. Following Jessica that night felt like a scene from one of those cheesy spy movies, except there was no dramatic music, just the quiet hum of my truck as I tailed her car from a safe distance. I knew where she was headed before she even got there. Chris didn't exactly scream subtlety. Sure enough, she pulled into the parking lot of a mid-tier hotel on the edge of town. Not the kind of place you'd take a mistress if you were trying to keep things low-key, but hey, at least the lobby had fake marble floors. I parked a few spaces down and watched her saunter inside, dressed like she was auditioning for a role in some budget rom-com. Now I could have stormed in right then and there, flipped over a table, and gone full Jerry Springer on both of them. But where's the fun in that? No, I had bigger plans. I snapped a few photos of her walking in, time-stamped and all, then sent them to myself for safekeeping. The real show was going to come later. The next morning, I again played my part like nothing had happened. Jessica rolled in around 8 a.m., and looking thoroughly disheveled. She tried to sneak past me in the kitchen, but I wasn't about to let her off that easy. Late night? I asked, pouring myself another cup of coffee. She froze mid-step, then turned to face me with a weak smile. Yeah, you know how Amanda gets when we're out. I couldn't help but grin at the sheer audacity. Oh, I know how Amanda gets, I said, taking a slow sip. Must have been a wild night. Her eyes narrowed slightly, like she was trying to figure out if I was mocking her. I was. A week later, I decided it was time to go all in. Jessica had no idea I'd already spoken to my lawyer, gathered all the evidence, and started putting together my exit strategy. All she knew was that I'd been unusually calm lately, too calm. The night of the big reveal, I waited until the boys were at a friend's house. Jessica came home from work, kicked off her shoes, and flopped onto the couch like she owned the place. "Hey," she said casually, scrolling through her phone. "Hey," I replied, sitting across from her. I set a thick manila folder on the coffee table between us. She glanced at it, then back at me. "What's that?" "Oh, just some stuff I've been working on," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Thought we could go over it together." Jessica's expression shifted, confusion, then curiosity, then a flicker of something like fear. She picked up the folder and opened it. The first thing she saw was a printout of her phone records, highlighting the hundreds of texts and calls between her and Chris. Next came the screenshots of their messages, the hotel receipts, and finally, the photos I'd taken of her walking into the hotel. Her face went pale. "What is this?" she whispered. "It's a divorce, Jessica," I said calmly. "Or at least the start of one." She looked up at me, her eyes wide with panic. "Wait, hold on. Let's talk about this." "Oh, we're talking," I said, leaning forward. "We're talking about how you've been sneaking around with your little boyfriend, lying to me, and using our family's money to fund your midlife crisis." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "It's not what it looks like," she stammered. I raised an eyebrow. "Really? Because it looks like you've been screwing some guy from work while pretending to go on girls' nights. But hey, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's a perfectly innocent explanation for the 900 texts and the hotel room." Jessica buried her face in her hands, her voice trembling. I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did." I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Wow, that's original. Did you two practice that line together, or is it just the go-to excuse for adulterers?" I wasn't done yet. I pulled out a copy of the proposed divorce agreement and slid it across the table. "Here's the deal, Jess. You get half of what we've built, after I deduct the cost of your little extracurricular activities. The house? We're selling it. The savings? I've already moved most of it into an account you can't touch. And as for Chris? Well, I hope he's ready to support you, because you're going to need it." Her head snapped up, her eyes blazing. "You can't do this." "Oh, but I can," I said, my voice ice cold. "See, you wanted an upgrade. You wanted to trade me in for a better option. But here's the thing about upgrades, they cost. And this one? It's going to cost you everything." Jessica didn't say a word. She just sat there, staring at the pile of evidence like it was a bomb about to go off. "By the way," I added, standing up, "I intend to talk to the HR department at your work. I think they don't approve of affairs in the workplace, especially when they involve married employees sneaking around during work hours. You might want to start updating your resume." Her jaw dropped. "You wouldn't do that." "Oh, I did," I said, grabbing my keys. "Enjoy the rest of your evening, Jess. And say hi to Chris for me." As I walked out the door, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The game was over, and I'd won. When you've been married for nearly 2 decades, you expect the fallout from a divorce to be messy. What I didn't expect was how quickly Jessica's life would unravel once I set things in motion. Turns out, when you build your happily ever after on a foundation of lies and betrayal, it doesn't take much for the whole thing to collapse. The first bomb dropped the Monday after our confrontation. True to my word, I'd sent an email to her company's HR department outlining her little escapades with Chris. I might have included a few attachments for good measure, photos of them entering and leaving the hotel, as well as a screenshot of a particularly spicy text exchange I'd recovered. Let's just say it didn't paint either of them in a professional light. By Wednesday, both Jessica and Chris were called into separate meetings with HR. According to one of her coworkers, who just so happened to text me after seeing the drama unfold, small world Jessica tried to spin the situation as harassment. She claimed Chris had been pursuing her, that she was the victim of unwanted advances. Unfortunately for her, the security footage from the office told a very different story. Turns out, the cameras in the break room captured one of their more intimate moments. A little kiss here, a lingering touch there. Nothing hardcore, but enough to blow her story to pieces. By the end of the day, both Jessica and Chris were escorted out of the building, their access badges deactivated and their reputations in shambles. Losing her job was bad enough, but it was just the beginning. Jessica had been banking on her salary to cover her half of the bills while we went through the divorce. Without it, she was screwed. She tried to convince me to stay in the house for the kids, but I wasn't having it. "You wanted out, Jess," I told her one night as we sat across from each other at the dining table. "Well, this is what out looks like. We're selling the house. End of discussion." She glared at me, her jaw clenched so tight I thought her teeth might shatter. "Where am I supposed to go?" "Not my problem," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Maybe Chris can put you up in his place." "Oh wait, he's jobless too, isn't he?" That shut her up real quick. The house went on the market the following week, and the offers came pouring in. With the way the housing market was, we made a tidy profit, but Jessica's share barely covered her debts. Turns out she'd been racking up credit card bills behind my back, shopping sprees, fancy dinners, weekend getaways with Chris. It was almost impressive how much damage she'd done in such a short amount of time. Speaking of Chris, his downfall was just as satisfying to watch. His wife, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Lisa, found out about the affair around the same time Jessica got canned. Unlike me, Lisa didn't waste time gathering evidence or playing the long game. She went scorched earth right out of the gate. Lisa filed for divorce, froze their joint accounts, and even managed to get Chris's car repossessed because it was technically in her name. She wasn't just kicking him to the curb, she was setting the curb on fire and tossing him into the flames. From what I heard, Chris moved into a crappy one-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. He and Jessica tried to keep their little romance going, but without jobs, money, or the thrill of sneaking around, it didn't take long for things to fall apart. A month after the house sold, Jessica was living in a rundown rental with peeling wallpaper and a leaky faucet. Her car, a shiny SUV she'd insisted on leasing, got repossessed after she missed 3 payments in a row. She called me one night, her voice shaky and desperate. "I need help," she said. I almost laughed. Almost. "What kind of help?" I asked, knowing full well what she was going to say. "I can't afford my bills," she admitted. "The rent's overdue, and I don't have enough to cover groceries. The boys need—" "Stop right there," I cut in. "The boys are fine. They're with me this week, remember? They've got food, clothes, and a roof over their heads. As for you, you made your bed, Jess. Now lie in it." She started crying, but I didn't have it in me to care. "You wanted a better life," I said coldly. "How's that working out for you?" I hung up before she could respond. While Jessica's life was spiraling into chaos, mine was heading in the opposite direction. I'd moved into a nice rental house close to the boys' school, and my day trading hobby had turned into a serious moneymaker. With the divorce settlement finalized, I had more financial freedom than I'd ever had in my marriage. I even treated myself to something I'd always wanted, a 1979 Fiat Spider convertible. The first time I drove it, with the top down and the wind in my hair, I felt like I'd finally shed the weight of the past. The boys adapted quickly to the new normal. Nathan, ever the sarcastic teenager, joked that I was going through a cool dad phase. Tyler, on the other hand, loved riding in the Fiat and blasting classic rock on the radio. As for my personal life, well, let's just say I wasn't in a rush to settle down again. I went on a few dates, met some interesting people, and started rediscovering parts of myself I'd buried during my marriage. Jessica and Chris? They didn't last. By the time the divorce was finalized, she was broke, jobless, and dealing with health issues she couldn't afford to treat. Last I heard, she was couch surfing at a friend's place, trying to rebuild her life one small step at a time. Do I feel bad for her? Not really. Actions have consequences, and she knew what she was risking when she decided to cheat. As for me, I'm doing better than ever. Financially secure, emotionally stable, and free to live life on my terms. In the end, Jessica's exit strategy didn't just fail, it backfired spectacularly. And honestly, watching it all unfold was the most satisfying thing I've ever experienced.